Welcome to my channel. This is Captain Binoy Varakil, Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph's College, Varakil. We continue our lecture series on Accidental Death of an Anarchist by Dario Fo. Today we discuss the topic Irony and Satire in the play Accidental Death of an Anarchist. Dario Fo's choice of dramatizing the story of Pinelli's death in police custody. He drew mainly from the documents coming from the journalists covering the trial of Pio Baldelli of Lotta Continua, accused of defamation of character by Inspector Calabresi, the counter-information as opposed to the disinformation of the state-run newspapers, and it was overtly critical of the existing system of administration and the judiciary. Though based on a real incident in Italy, Fo's rendering has a universal look for which it has been successfully adapted in so many languages the world over. Fo and Reim publicly described their aim in writing the play in terms of political struggle. It was yet a struggle of non-conformist group that denied the banner of political parties and hence had the opportunity to satirize the rightists as well as the socialists. To quote from Fo's own observation, the magistracy and the police which the play accuses are not simply institutions to be criticized or corrected, not an edifice on which we put pressure to avoid it malfunctioning. They are the most overt expressions of the bourgeoisie state, of the class enemy to be fought. On the other hand, as far as the nature of this instrument for political struggle is concerned, it is our conviction that a theatre which describes the world of today to men of today can only do so if it portrays that world as something which can be changed. Fo calls his struggle the struggle exposed in his drama, a political one, because he attacks the bourgeoisie institutions and the bourgeoisie temperament as a spokesman of the mass, the downtrodden and the oppressed. The success of his satire owes much to the ironic style adopted in the drama. While talking about his work, Fo himself said that everything must be done through irony, and everything, including the title of the play, the choice of the maniac as a central character, use of a knife who gets his seniors trapped while trying to help them, is replete with irony. Irony adds the desired sharpness to satire and also makes it lively and universal. To start with the title, Accidental Death of an Anarchist, Fo intends to reveal that neither is the death accidental nor is it the death of an anarchist. Though it is now generally held that Inspector Calabresi did not push Pinelli, the anarchist in the play he is supposed to be, hit by some policemen, and his alleged suicide is rendered fake. The madman's backing up the police when they argue that there is nothing to be surprised at the fact that the ambulance was called 5 minutes before the body fell from the window, as the problem stems from the people's watches, is a perfect example of irony. The madman's presentation of the death as accidental exposes dramatically the ironic nature of his statement. He refers to the death as accidental but shows it as murder. During the final stages of the anarchist's interrogation, a few minutes before midnight, one of the men present lost his patience and hit the anarchist with some force on the back of his neck. with the result that he was semi-paralyzed and was unable to breathe. So an ambulance was called. Meanwhile, the window was thrown wide open and the anarchist was carried over and the top half of his body thrust out of the window in the hope that the cold air would revive him. The two policemen who were holding him were unfortunately unable to maintain their concentration, and in a moment of confusion he was dropped. Though described innocently, the policeman's hitting the anarchist with some force and his getting paralyzed, unable to breathe, are clear instances of the policeman's involvement in the anarchist's death. Again, the constable's invincible simplicity allows him to expose matters in such a way as renders the playwright's ironic intention, which is appreciated by the audience but which is not intended by the constable himself. For example, when the madman mimics the anarchist who must have been desperate and threw himself out of the window, the constable swears that it was the exact way the anarchist threw himself out. The constable is unaware of the implication of his command. He only wants to save the police from bad repute, but ironically, his words bring quite the opposite result. The very concept of the madman itself is ironic. The madman is not at all mad, but more sane and more logical than others. Such a certified madman is let loose inside the police headquarters for finding out what exactly happened to the anarchist before his fall from the window. As Christopher Cairn says, in fact, what sparks of the game, comic as well as satiric, is the choice of a madman, a maniac, hooked on disguise, who, following the logic of paradox of all madmen, throws into disarray the logic of the sane. Thus it happens that the sane become the real madman, madmen and criminals to boot. Whatever the madman says and does is replete with irony. For example, when the madman wants to know from the superintendent why of all persons they suspected the railway man to be responsible for the bomb burst, the superintendent answers that as the accused was the only anarchist who was also a railway man, they deduced that it must be him. The madman's ironic retort may be quotation. Of course. So as it was clearly a railway man who planted the bombs on the railway, we can also deduce that notorious bombing of the Palace of Justice was perpetrated by a judge, that the Bank of Agriculture was bombed by either a banker or a farmer, and the tomb of the unknown warrior by a dead soldier. The irony in the madman's weighty and logical argument adds the desired sharpness to the satire. The brutality and the immoral way of self-defense embraced by the policemen are exposed. As Fo himself expressed, the judiciary and the police force, the two most overt expressions of the bourgeoisie state, are satirized in his drama for compelling them to stop malfunctioning. Fo's charges against the judiciary may be arranged as follows. First, the judges are selected only from the bourgeoisie class, and that is why the common people belonging to plebeian in particular can hardly expect justice from the judges. Secondly, the judges are often old, retired persons, and they are likely to make mistakes while taking some important decisions. Thirdly, and the most important of all, the judges are rendered as persons having loose moral and hobnobbing with the policemen. In the first scene of the first act, when the madman is doing his solo, preparing himself for impersonating a judge, he says, "First things first, get rid of the accent because you don't get high-powered people from the provinces, do you? Judges, judges, what are judges like? Well, they are the top of the tree. They are as high up as you can get. They are sacred like royalty. Again, when he practices how to talk to the policeman as a judge, he says, "Don't come any closer. Your armpits are nauseating and your breath smells of smoke and fatty foods." While answering Miss Felletti's charge against the judges that they declared the old pensioner's witness inadmissible, the madman supported the judge ironically. Well, you can hardly blame him. How can you expect a pensioner who has been battered and squeezed dry by 45 years of badly paid work to be in the possession of the minimum physical and mental powers required for the delicate task of giving evidence? If you were to go into that pub down by the canal, you would not find alert minds and healthy bodies sustained by years of good food and vitamin supplements every winter. And yet you tell me the judge should have trusted their memories on a matter of such importance. The bourgeoisie attitude that accepts their culture as the only civilized one and neglects the plebeian culture as uncivilized is thus ironically displayed through the madman's pretension that he is actually supporting the judges. The madman's rehearsal before impersonating a judge is a direct attack on the judges. As the madman says he is in his solo performance in Act 1, Scene 1, the judges are usually very old. They give interviews long after they have lost the power to think, and they fell asleep a lot. They don't like the juries who belong to the middle class. The judges again prefer death sentence because it would sometimes save money. In Act 1, Scene 2, when the madman tells the superintendent of the lacuna in their report on the custodial death, he says that no one but a judge would believe in their report. The madman reproduces this comment when the policeman says that the accused only pretended to take offense, and yet, without any logical pretext, he committed suicide. He jumps out the window. You describe the event exactly as it happened, and of course it sounds so ridiculous that no one is ever going to believe you, except of course our dear old friend the judge who closed the inquiry. The madman falls upon the judges several times whenever he finds the slightest opportunity. When he thinks of impersonating a judge, he reflects on the judge's age, his incapacity, inhumanity, and greed. At exactly the age when an ordinary man or woman in the street is being forced out to pasture, a judge is well groomed and galloping into his prime. The madman observes, when the officer, office worker, the factory worker, the miner, and such other common persons are found inefficient, the judge, even if half blind, half crippled, half senile, aspires for a knighthood, a rise in his salary, heading a commission, and such other alluring positions. The madman's harsh comments on the judges are almost unparalleled. You see old men like peeling cardboard cutouts, dolled up with insignia, ermine capes, outsized white brillo pads on their heads, looking like pins of lukewarm Guinness, sweat-faced, wearing 2 pairs of glasses on little chains, otherwise they would lose them. These national treasures exercise a power to destroy or save us with less deliberation than they choose with chablis to accompany their fish. They dictate, legislate, sentence, decree. They are sacred like loyalty. This direct attack is not fun. nor is it an ironic comment that rouses laughter. It is so harsh that the audience keeps mum, and the authority is undone as it is uttered by a madman. A madman's privilege, his license of uttering anything without the fear of being prosecuted, could hardly be better utilized for satirizing the institutions such as judiciary. For anger, it becomes obvious, is due to the judge's carelessness while uttering verdicts. In the penalty case, they overlooked the lacuna in the statement given by the police and did not bother to see if an innocent was being heckled to death in police custody. The lack of public confidence in the forces of law and order is expressed in such remarks. The madman's charges against the police are that they are brutal, fraud, and are lacking in moral values. When Inspector Pisani supplies the madman with utterly false reports that the accused was being entertained in the police custody, the madman's lash of satire stops them. I'm sure the inspector provides excellent entertainment for your suspects. In fact, this revelation takes a great weight off my mind. When I read the almost daily reports of screams and moans emitting from police interrogation rooms around the world, I imagine the people inside are being beaten up. But now I know their screams are screams of laughter and their moans are of helpless hysteria. Oh God, stop it please. I can't take any more. Stop, Inspector. I'm going to die laughing. Now I know why so many innocent people get themselves arrested by your men. They want to enjoy the benefit of the inspector's comic talent. I thought they were anarchists, communists, militants, but they are not. Here is a perfect example of satire replete with irony. Besides such ironic comments, there are lots of direct attack on the policemen. When it comes out that the policeman invented lies in regard to the anarchist dancer friend who is told to have confessed his involvement in the Milan bombing case, the madman says that the police lied to the suspect, to the inquiry and to the public in the press and on television. He even taunts them with the remark that they should attempt writing a novel together or a major mini-series. The policemen are then charged with gross negligence and wanton fraudulence. Dario Fo's chief concern being political, he utilizes every opportunity to satirize the rightist government. Through the madman's process of threatening the policemen, the fraudulent nature of the government is exposed. Your careers are ruined. That's politics for you. First, they needed your help. They wanted you to smash the unions, and you did. When the public take to streets to demonstrate, you are sent in to make sure it ends in an ugly scene of extremist violence. When the media get hold of embarrassing information, you are sent in to ransack the television studios. And in the struggle to destroy socialism, it's you they count on most. But now it's all changed. The anarchist death from that window over there has prompted a huge public outcry. The government is desperate for a scapegoat. Heads must roll. The facade of democracy being torn, the ugly look of repressive government is visible, and it is done through a certified madman who has free access to every office as he is immune from punishment by law. He quotes from the Italian Penal Code in support of a madman who cannot be prosecuted. Critics have noted Pirandello's influence on Fo in these cases. Besides his attack on the judiciary and the administration, Fo expresses his awareness of the symptoms of malaise in other institutions also. The madman finds fault with the reporters who, he says, are often blind to the actual condition of the common people in Italy. They speak eloquently of poverty and inequality elsewhere in the world, but hardly find fault with the systems in their own land until some events such as bombing create commotion. A murderous alliance of paramilitary and industrial interests is also brought to light. For uses irony again when the madman discloses the dubious nature of the government. People want justice, so we make sure they get a justice that is not quite so unjust. People want to see the back of class, so we mix a heady cocktail of consumer boom and social welfare and pretend real poverty does not exist. People want participation, so we sell them a few shares and tell them true society lies in the family. And when people want real change, they are given reforms. And when a crisis arrives, the reforms are withdrawn and they are told to be thankful they don't live in Eastern Europe. Though Fo's play is based on a real incident, it transcends its initial theme and becomes applicable to similar cases in different parts of the world. Fo's pronouncements on legal questions, on judicial process, particularly in matters of public concern, on ill treatment of the accused leading to unnatural death, and similar other topics are applicable to any part of the world where the repressive government, be it social, democratic, or rightist, is functioning. Fo himself suggested that his play would be more applicable to the British context than to the Italian. The drama was thus adapted into English with additions from relevant topics. It's pretension more than anything else that Fo has attacked in his play. He has attacked the government's secret wish to obliterate the opposition, to find illegal ways to be in power and to legalize them, to neglect the right demands of the oppressed and the downtrodden, and yet to be proud of maintaining democracy. He comes upon heavily on the complacence of the common citizens. To quote the madman again, reflect on the sublime social democracies of the United States and Great Britain. When President Reagan's closest aides traded arms illegally and used the profits to fund the murdering supporters of an ex-dictator and so wear down the governments of Nicaragua, did the people in America demand an end to his corrupt term in office? Of course not. They loved him all the more for his aged naivety. And when he eventually retired, they waved him a tearful goodbye and elected his party for another term. They thought, yes, corruption exists, but it comes to the surface. We swim about in this shit, we drink it, but no one tried to pretend it's anything but shit. That is what counts. According to Fo, it's not enough to know about the sources of corruption. It's no credit that one recognizes one's faults and remains passive. The corruption has to be rooted out. Fo says, commenting on the democracy in Britain as the best manured, the madman refers to an incident that took place in southeast of England about 16 years ago. 3 men and 1 woman were physically abused and threatened into confessing to an appalling bombing of which they were not guilty. In their haste to secure convictions, the police force and the establishment had colluded in a campaign of fraud and perjury. They had to spend 15 years in prison, and then it was found that they were innocent. 7 members of one family were also imprisoned in connection with the crime in a similar way, and they were found not guilty only after 15 years of imprisonment. One of them even died in prison. The madman complains that the judge who presided over both the trials was not dismissed or retired or even transferred, but was allowed to continue in the post of master of the rolls, which places him in charge of civil justice. To lay bare the scandalous failure of British justice, the madman relates another incident of bomb explosion in the same year that took the lives of 21 people in Midland. In that case, 6 persons were imprisoned on the basis of flimsy scientific evidence, while some other men who have publicly confessed to the bombing are still moving scot-free. Fo warns that everybody should protest against such an appalling vista and there should be an end to such actions in all corners of the world. The church as an institution is not spared. The madman refers to the proverbial hypocrisy of the Jesuits. He also refers to a bishop who was an unrelenting hypocrite, a pathological liar. Alan Cumming and Tim Sapul observe that accidental death is born out of classic satirical principles. The structure, rhythms, and language do not, however, match with those of a classical satire, but the basic principles of satire, that of detecting the evils and presenting ironically so as to remove the very root of the evils, remains the same. Fo is not satisfied with just holding up human vices and follies to ridicule. For him, satire is a literary manner which blends a critical attitude with humor and wit to the end that human institutions may be improved. His use of the grotesque side by side with the stark realities produce the desired effect. That Fo's satire has been effective is clear from the hostile responses to his being the Nobel laureate. The political and cultural conservatives in Italy and also all over the world were so outraged that they described Fo as a mere performance artist, an ignoble prize winner, and even an unrepentant hater of common decency. In his Nobel Peace Acceptance speech, Fo remarkably said, "Ladies and gentlemen, friends of mine, noted men of letters, have declared in various radio and television interviews the highest prize should no doubt be awarded to the members of the Swedish Academy for having had the courage this year to award the Nobel Prize to a jester. I agree. Yours is an act of courage that borders on provocation, is enough to take stock of the uproar this election has caused. Sublime poets and writers who normally occupy the loftiest spheres and who rarely take an interest in those who live and toil on humble plains are suddenly bowled over by some kind of whirlwind. There were reports of poets and writers whose nerves and livers suffered terribly. For a few days thereafter, there was not a pharmacy in Italy that could muster up a single tranquilizer. Here is the reaction of a playwright who is happy that his satire hit the target, and as a result, the conservatives and the bourgeoisie who were his target became so angry that they forgot the decency of manners. The reaction of those conservatives at the declaration of the Nobel Prize Award for Literature in 1997 drew more satire. Or one may note the slant remarks such as sublime poets who rarely come down on humble plane, etc. In Fo's address, irony and satire are perfectly blended once again. With this, we come to the end of the lecture on irony and satire in the play. And in the next lecture, we'll be looking at subversive humor and traditional folk tale in the play Accident Death of an Anarchist. Thank you very much for listening.